Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my next Legacy of Yangchen chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 7, which is called Mistaken Identity. So this is a very interesting chapter. So we finally have Kavik and Yangchen on their own here, kind of restarting to a certain degree the Avatar and companion dynamic, but of course it's under very forced circumstances here, so it's not straight back to normal. But as we'll see, immediately I think some of the kind of cracks in Yangchen's armor begin to kind of fall immediately. Like, she has needed someone like this, a companion, for a while now. But the title, what it's referring to, is that we finally get what I think we were waiting for in the entire first book. A situation where in the present day, Yangchen is actually overtaken by one of the past avatars, and Kavik actually gets to see one of these kind of incidents happen, referencing the very start of the first book. So some fascinating stuff here as we go through this chapter, but we'll jump in here. So they just make a note, the kind of a humorous aspect here of, like, this is like what, the third time now that Kavik has had to be smuggled in or out of a place, and usually it's this very well coordinated and structured thing, but this time out he's just been rolled up into a carpet. So they're basically preparing to leave. It's the big whole kind of celebration in the Northern Water Tribe as the visit of the Avatar comes to an end. She has her big meeting with Chief Oiluk, and as part of all the stuff that she has, kind of all the gifts that she's been given, there's also a carpet rolled up and placed onto the back of everything, and that's where Kavik is during all of this. Yangchen, of course, is toying with Kavik here, taking a lot of joy in the fact that he's just in rolled up in some carpet. There's a fun mention here. By the time she got to wishing good health upon the new litter of snow leopard caribou cubs in the royal stables, it was clear she was dragging her feet on purpose. And she just has the kind of handler guys just like throw the carpet onto the thing. So, you know, just anything to get one over on him. So anyway, they're on Nujian here. They head up. Kavik is ultimately free, but she continues to take some joy in this. She's just like, hey, help me out of here. But she's just like, Rains, I'm flying Nujian here. But he's like, I know you can fly him without using the reins. That's the connection that you have. You don't need that. So eventually he's kind of allowed out. You know, there's an interaction with Pick and Pack here, of course. But there is a kind of mention here, like he starts talking here about, like, oh, that was the closest I've ever come to meeting the Chief of the North. And he kind of jokes about how maybe one day I'll get to meet the Fire Lord by, like, sneaking up on him. But she's like, no, I am tolerating your presence for now. Don't go assuming everything's back to normal. But then she immediately changes and is like, how's your brother? And it's obviously meant to be a jab here of, like, you basically betrayed me for your brother, referencing the fact that, like, you're trying to be friendly with me again, but you seem to ultimately care more about your brother. And he just is really honest. Like, that's the policy he's taking here, as honest as possible. I don't know where he is. I assume he's still working for Chaises, trying to kind of stay undercover. And you know what happens to when she finds out about spies, and this kind of turns it kind of back around. She is completely aware of the danger of Chaisi in all of this. So he does come clean about a little bit of what was discussed towards the end of the last chapter, the more kind of betrayal thing that Ayunarak is actually asking of Kavik. He does say, Ayunarak said she will help me to look for him once the time is right. But of course, he doesn't explain that he's really there to try and get information on unanimity. That is ultimately the kind of, like, secret aspect of the second kind of betrayal overall. But they kind of bond over this a little bit of, like, oh, well, if you're getting a promise from the White Lotus, it might be pushed back until the next era because they love waiting so much. And again, this is Kavik once again realizing this is the core difference between the two of them. The Avatar likes to act now. Ayunarak likes to wait for the perfect moment. And he obviously would prefer the Avatar's approach, because if Yangchen was offering the same deal, it would be done, like, immediately rather than all this kind of waiting around. At this point, he kind of notes that they're not necessarily heading in the right direction to get to Taku for the big meeting and set up everything there. She mentions that first they're dropping all the gifts that Oyaluk gave to them at the Northern Air Temple. So he's eager to see this place again. The sunset, of course. And this is where we get another little kind of flashback to kind of Ayunarak getting him up to speed on kind of what information he will need. Mentioning that, like, oh, well, the Northern Air Temple was one of the most obvious places that they could be held. So the fact that we're going there, I'll be able to do a little bit of investigation is kind of what he's thinking. Ayunarak kind of in the past kind of said, convenience and logistics. It's, close to Bin She has a certain level of control over the air temples. It's the perfect place to do it, especially up in the mountains in the north. But Kavik is like, wouldn't she like prefer to do this in her home temple, the Western Temple? But Ayunarak, a nice reference here to their scene from the previous book. Due to an unforced error on my part, she doesn't consider the Western Temple leak-proof anymore. And that's obviously because Ayunarak knows about her gift, because there was effectively an Order of the White Lotus member somewhere in the Western Air Temple. Now, as far as I'm aware, in my first readings of the book, I don't remember the exact person being revealed, but I think the idea they're going for is like with the whole Platinum Affair thing. It's ultimately just a kind of unnamed advisor, and in this case, I think it is just meant to be some random member of the group. In a way, like kind of almost a Jinpa of this era, in a way, just someone is there kind of giving information back to the Order of the White Lotus. But Kavik is like to Ayunarak, like, you don't think she killed them, do you? And Ayunarak is like, no. Retribution is for amateurs. She's convinced that the three combustion benders are absolutely safe. That's the game that they're playing here, ultimately. So that's the kind of background here to some of this stuff. They're obviously going through great lengths here. Like, Yangchen is pushing herself and Nujian to a certain extent, but mainly herself because she hasn't slept, to travel and get through as much ground as possible. And he's noticing that, like, she is really pushing herself to her absolute limits. And he's like, we have to set up camp. And he's like, it's not because of Nujian, it's because of you. You didn't sleep at all in the safe house, basically. Even the great Yangchen needs her rest, and she does ultimately accept this, and so they do land. And this is where I actually really like this moment. Kavik says he's going to do something very important, and that is that when he gets off Nujian, he goes straight around in front to talk to Nujian and apologizes and kind of rubs him and stuff like that. And it's like, what I did wasn't right. I'm glad to be back riding with you. And it's a very fun moment because Yangchen is like, like, you gave the bison a more heartfelt apology than you gave to me. And Kavik's just like, I'm apologizing. I'm busy here. And he notes here that, Nujian is his favorite of her kind of other companions, referencing Pig Pack and Nujian, of course. So that's a fun little moment there, definitely. But, and clever on his part as well. Like, this is the kind of right approach, make up with her friends, and eventually she'll kind of turn around eventually. Like, it's the right thing to do here. But then, this is where the chapter kind of like takes its twist, referencing the title. So they get down, like, Kavik's kind of cleaning up the camp. They're kind of getting ready to go to sleep. And he's like, help me clean up. And she's just like, no. And Kavik's like, okay, I thought we were kind of past you're not going to talk to me and be really kind of blunt with me. But then he notices that, like, her kind of stance, her entire, like, demeanor has kind of changed here. And then when she speaks again, she effectively is speaking with a different voice. And what she says, as someone else here, is, I'm done, Masosa. I'm done cleaning up after them. And he's kind of like, what's going on here? We do get up to speed with that. He is aware. Ayunarak has briefed him on Yangchen's gift. So he knows that, okay, once he kind of gets clear that it's not Yangchen just kind of freaking out. It is actually this gift actually taking place here. He's kind of watches this happen, but he knows that she doesn't have a strong wall between herself and her past lives. That's what's happening here. So what way will I do this? Because again, we have to reference the details of this from the first book here. I think what I'll do is I'll just go through this because there's only a page or two left in the chapter, and then we'll reference what the details about this from the first book. So yeah, I'm done Masosa. I'm done cleaning up after them. They take with both hands, and they pay only with blame. They find your edges and then dwell there. Work 100 miracles, you're worthless for not performing 101. This is where like Kavik is like, Avatar Yangchen, is that you? And she says, as this person, I'm so close to giving up on them. I'm so tired of fighting on their behalf. Human beings choose their own misery over and over again. Tell me why humanity deserves an Avatar Masosa. I could handle the blame, the finger pointing, if I just knew why. And this is where Kavik realizes like, oh, I'm going to have to respond here as if I am Masosa. And he doesn't know who this is. We, of course, do, if you read the first book. But he doesn't know the specifics here, what avatar he's talking to here. And so he has to just kind of continue this conversation and ease things out here. So he says, I can't tell you why we're worthy of a protector. You have to believe we are. And immediately he knows that, like, I don't know if that's the best response. And Yangchen, as this other avatar, chuckles and is like, that's it? That's your only reason? Blind faith that people can change? And this is where, like, it kind of freaks Yangchen out a bit. She begins to, like, laugh, like, quite maniacally almost. She actually, it says here, she beat her chest with her fist hard enough that she thought she might crack her breastbone. But this is what kind of forces her out of this. She kind of like gets up at this point and it's just like, oh, you just saw that happen. But she figures it out that like, oh, a Unarak must have told you about what happened. How embarrassing was it? Like, what did I say? You don't remember? Not always. So Kavik actually lies here, and this is one of those ones where, like, I think this is like the right approach to take in this situation here. He knows it was pretty heavy what was just referenced here by this past avatar. So he's just like, you just whined a lot. You were playing some sort of a game I didn't recognize and were complaining to a judge. And Yangchen's just like, oh, that one's new to me. I guess I can't be a good sport in every life. And he's just said, like, we both need rest. Well, at this time, like, you can see that things have kind of, changed a little bit. She's just like, fine, get in the tent. And she is so exhausted at this point. She's basically about to collapse. So he has to kind of like lie her down. And he knows that this is a little bit of a kind of change. Like, before, she was definitely kind of trying to keep up the whole idea of like, I'm annoyed at you, so I'm not going to speak to you in the kind of the way I would usually do it. But she's obviously in this kind of more vulnerable position here, and he's effectively having to kind of act as the guardian kind of the avatar in this moment. But as she's about to drift off to sleep, the possession kind of comes back a little bit, and it's like, I'm going. Thank you, Say. And this is where she goes to sleep. So very, very interesting scene there, of course, as the chapter ends. So, in case you weren't aware, this is referencing from the first book, The Dawn of Yangchen, Chapter 1. We get this reference. This is the very first possession we hear about in the first chapter in the flashback. This is the person who Jetson is running through the temple to find out about. It's Masosa. And we get the kind of explanation of like, which one is it? Like, there's a few of them throughout history. It must be the famous scholar. And then this is where they figure it out. Jetson gets the book, A Discourse on Floodplain Management, and reads that to Yangchen to calm her down. Then later on, Jetson explains who Masosa is when asked about it. Who was Masosa? A companion of Avatar Gun. That's a G-U-N, so Avatar Gun, but it's pronounced Gun. Skilled poet and engineer who died in Ha'an when Gun failed to hold back a tsunami. And this relates to it as well. Like the fact that this is how this is marked down in history, that he failed to hold back a tsunami. Now, this is what Jetson notes. Jetson found a sour taste rising in her mouth. Failed. Not the choice of words she would have used for someone, avatar or not, bravely confronting a force of nature. Ha'an still stood today as a port when it sounded like it could have been wiped out off the map along with everyone who lived there at the time. It's what's written. After Masosa drowned, Gun disappeared for a while before returning to duty. You were grieving. If the waters that Gun fought were the same ones that killed Masosa, then both the girl and the past life raging through her might have personally witnessed their friend take their last breath before plunging below the waves. They would have searched for a body in the wreckage. And worst of all, Jetson thought, they would have had to struggle with the terrible question of, what if I'd done things differently? What if? Perhaps Gun was the one who demanded the label of failure. And just the kind of unjust nature of the way some of these things can be talked about or recorded in history. And it definitely relates to what's being talked about here, because there's clearly the connection. Even though this chapter, it doesn't mention Gun just by the very nature of the fact that Kavik can't possibly know this specific scene from the first book and that this is who it is. But there's no way there's another different avatar who also has a companion named Masosa. It's clearly the same thing. But obviously, in this situation, what we kind of get is that this is Gun, who in the past was on the verge of giving up on humanity. That's what was being talked about there. I'm this close to giving up on them, that they can't help themselves, which, and this is the most important bit, we know that Yangchen was feeling that way like a chapter or two ago. Just before she went into the spirit world, she was kind of like, what if I just let them kind of destroy themselves almost. The Shoken quote about kind of leaving the crying child who doesn't kind of respond to the kind of kindness in a way. That is that the approach that should be taken? Is that the approach that Gun was going to take here? The idea, like he said, I can do 100 miracles, but they want one more. And in a way, if it doesn't work out perfectly, that last one, that's all that will be remembered. And it seems like that's kind of ultimately, in a way, what kind of ends up happening here. Of just like, he was this incredible avatar, but one of the bigger things in history is that, but you failed to stop a tsunami. People died, but as Jetson notes, that tsunami seemed like a particularly terrible one. And the fact that he saved the town from being wiped off the map is notable just by itself. And that has to go down in history. He has to acknowledge that, like, his whole life, that, that's the way he is treated for that. And what's interesting about it is that clearly, based on just the way timeline has to work, the fact that in this scene, it's referencing a conversation he had with his companion. This has to take place before the tsunami, of course. Meaning that eventually Gun made the decision to give humanity a chance. Otherwise, like, would he have been there to face the tsunami and try and protect the people there in the first place? So he comes close to giving up on humanity, but ultimately doesn't. And in a way, this is meant to be referencing kind of a similar thing with Yangchen, of she does all of this stuff, but it only seems to be the failures that she kind of that it gets kind of lingered on, and nothing ever seems to be good enough. And it's a good use of it, because it's like the only use of this in the book. I think it's very interesting. Yes, I wish we learned more about Avatar Gun over the course of this. I really do. But I also will acknowledge that the entire, in a way, point of the gift is in a way to highlight that it hasn't been particularly useful to Yangchen. That is the entire point in the first book of the scene with Ayunarak. Ayunarak is just like, because you have such a strong connection to the past lives, you, of all people, should be able to use the wisdom of the past to create a new gilded or golden age. And Yangchen kind of responds by saying, yeah, I talked to dozens upon dozens upon dozens of avatars. But all I took away was that they all never wish they had waited any more than they kind of had to. They all wish they could have done more, and all kind of lingered on their failures. As far as I'm concerned, there never really was a gilded age that you talk about. So the point kind of being made there is that for the situations that Yangchen faces, in most of those situations, it is not as simple as just meditating and asking a past life for advice. That's not going to work for her because it's very specific about the politics of a particular age. Because again, the implication is that she's done her research. She knows the history of the past lives. If there's anything to reference or acknowledge from history, she's going to bring it into play. But and that's the entire kind of point here. And I feel a lot of people who've read these two books haven't quite taken that on board, and it's more of just the very basic point of I'm frustrated that the books didn't reveal more about past avatars to me. When the book is about Yangchen, who happens to have this gift, but they're making the kind of almost surprise point of that gift doesn't mean as much as you think it does, given the actual challenges that she actually faces. So it's one of those things where, like, I think it's more of a franchise problem that there seems to be a hesitancy to talk about certain other past avatars, which is why the likes of Gun only gets a scene or two, why Salai only gets like very vague mentions. But that is stuff to be covered at a later point. And everything new we learn is interesting. And even the fact that we did get this, learning that Avatar Gun was one who was about to kind of give up on humanity. But I also, like, going back to the specifics of the scene, I know Kavik criticizes what he said in response to like the question from Gun, but I think that's it. It's simple what he says, but it's the only kind of, in a way, in my mind, correct answer. Like, there is no amazing answer for why we're worthy of a protector. You just have to believe that we are. That is kind of like the core of what Yangchen says to Aang in kind of Escape from the Spirit World. Like, you just have to understand that, like, humanity makes mistakes. No one's perfect. There will be flaws, but in a way, that is kind of why we need to be kind of protected and allowed to make these mistakes. Like, you have to acknowledge you yourself can make mistakes, and that applies to everyone else as well. So I do very much like that. And then just in general, the chapter, I think, did a good job at, like, approaching this relationship, which was, to me, it would have been the wrong choice in this book to do it where Yangchen has effectively turned off communication with Kavik, and this is a thing that lasts over the course of chapters upon chapters. That would be needless drama, when I think the whole point that's being made with her character, and why the Ayunarak kind of gambit worked of just being like, take the kid back, is because Ayunarak is able to see that, like, I want to spy, but also you kind of need him. And that very much comes across here. She tries to maintain the, I'm annoyed at you thing, but these two work so well together. She does begin to kind of talk to him again. And that's the whole kind of point of this, in a way, that this is the correct approach to this. Kavik has to make amends. He's doing all the right things that he has to do. He just needs to not get ahead of himself. But Yangchen also needs to be willing at some point to, like, not let her issues with what happened get in the way of what's going to happen as well. So little things like at the end, the fact that she's, like, basically saying, like, come into the tent, there's no need for you to kind of stay outside. It's just the door kind of opening up on their kind of relationship beginning to get back to normal. Like I said before, I really like how the dynamic is done here over the course of the book, and it was something I was like, there's a few different ways they could approach doing it, but I'm super happy with what we got. So very, very interesting chapter. Yeah, like, so many nice moments, like the apology to Nujian, even the inclusion of Pick and Pack in this is nice. The little extra scene with kind of Ayunarak and the reference of, like, even while the relationship is improving, they're kind of setting up the idea of, we're going to the location where unanimity could be. While you're almost mending the relationship here, you're almost this close to activating the betrayal that will break the relationship once again. So, you know, there's that kind of aspect of as well. So it's very cleverly written, I think, this chapter, start to finish, overall. So really strong one for me, and it much needed. Like, just the first one-on-one chapter between the two, very nicely done. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this chapter. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.